thinking about like the coolest parts about just post getting my pilot certificate, meeting all of the other your friends who are either similar to your age or similar to your background, and learning to fly together, and then having barbecues together. A friend of mine's flight school that was happening to, and they landed, and literally the door opened, and I saw smoke come out. So I'm always nervous for those people. I'm just hoping their training really kicked in, and they were doing exactly what they're supposed to do. But unfortunately, it happens in general aviation. Luckily, knock on wood, on my chair that I'm sitting on right now, I've never had a single engine failure, but I have had a multi-engine failure before. That CP dive or control power drag, identify, verify, fix, or feather. And literally you should be able to say and do those things just as quick as you say them. That training, I think, has probably saved my life. I have a motto, and I say yes to everything. I don't know, maybe I've got FOMO of everything, but I always want to say yes to everything. I want to say yes to doing the crazy thing. I always feel like I want to be able to help them, but I know there's nothing I can do being in another aircraft hearing it. And I've heard Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. I've heard declaring an emergency. I've even heard smoke in the cockpit. That's actually the most recent one I heard. Hey, why don't we turn this into a company? And I said, let's do it. Let's go help more pilots. I mean, it'll change people's lives, and it'll also be a fun adventure to do something together, and might even make some money in the long run with it. So far, so great, at least so far.
What would it take for you to turn your dream into reality? Some people have a dream of flying. That was one of mine. There's even some people that start that, but then for one reason or another, never realize their dream. If you've ever wanted to fly, whether that's flying airplanes, or maybe you have another dream and have been stopped in your progress because you don't have the resources to do it, then you'll love hearing about Stratus Financial and its founder, Brandon Martini, my guest today. Brandon helps young pilots finance their dream of becoming a pilot. He finances flight training. He's passionate about flying himself. He's had some amazing aviation experiences. And I had a delightful conversation today with my guest, Brandon Martini. Brandon, only a few times since I've started flying have I heard the words Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. When you hear that, what happens? What do you feel?
Well, it depends. Am I in the airplane or not? I'm assuming it's somebody else saying it. I always feel like I want to be able to help them, but I know there's nothing I can do being in another aircraft hearing it. And I've heard Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. I've heard declaring an emergency. I've even heard smoke in the cockpit. That's actually the most recent one I heard. And I was on the ground for that one, and it was a friend of mine's flight school that was happening to, and they landed, and literally the door opened, and I saw smoke come out. So I'm always nervous for those people. I'm just hoping their training really kicked in, and they were doing exactly what they're supposed to do. But unfortunately, it happens in general aviation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you responded with, I want to help, because that's actually exactly where Mayday comes from. I don't know if you knew that or not, but it comes from a French word that means please help me. And so, as you know, I haven't been in the position where I've had to declare an emergency yet. There have been times where I think it was pretty close. But I have been either in the air or on the ground. There was one time in particular, I was at Falcon Field and sitting on the ground waiting to go, and heard another pilot call in that he was experiencing engine failure. He was about 5 miles from the field, and that he was going to try and make it. And I feel like my heart just like gets stuck in my throat, because I can imagine exactly what's going through your head. If you were already headed into the airport, you probably don't have a ton of altitude, and you're going through the procedures, but mostly I think you're just like, am I going to make it out of this? Or Am I going to be okay? And I love that you brought up training, because training is a big part of your aviation career, and you actually help others get training now. Have there been times where the training that you've received has come in handy to bail you out of what might have been an otherwise difficult situation?
Yeah, especially with like multi-engine flying. For luckily, knock on wood, on my chair that I'm sitting on right now, I've never had a single engine failure, but I have had a multi-engine failure before. And that CP dive, or control power drag, identify, verify, fix or feather, and literally you should be able to say and do those things just as quick as you say them. That training, I think, has probably saved my life. And that's one thing in particular that I could tell you for sure. Another one that just seems so rudimentary, but it's the go around, like how to go around. I'm sure you've seen lots of videos of people trying to go around in an airplane, and they just do it improperly, and they lose their airspeed, or they pull their power. They do something wonky that's has nothing to do with actually going around. And I think just those basic things is what keep us safe as pilots, to be honest with you.
Tell me about the experience of losing an engine in a twin. You alluded to it a little bit there, but I'd love to hear the story behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually flying. I believe it was either a Baron or a Duchess. I want to say it was a Baron. And me and coincidentally my friend Richard, he's also a mechanic and my partner at Cavu Aero Service. But we took off from Riverside, and we were going to go to Camarillo Airport, and we were going to go look at. I used to buy and sell a lot of airplanes in like 2017, 2018, 2019. And we were looking at an airplane for me to go purchase, and I was going to refurbish and then flip it. So we were on our way there. So I happened to have my mechanic with me because we were going to go do kind of a pre-buy inspection on this and go check it out. So we take off, and luckily he was with me, because we take off and he's not multi-engine rated, and I didn't have that many multi-engine hours. But all I start seeing like my manifold pressure, or I can't remember, but something was like going down. And then I realized I was putting more and more rudder in to maintain straight and level flight.
Hmm.
And then I looked on my right wing, and Rich looks at my right wing and he's like, "Oh my gosh, Brandon, there's blue all over the wing." And that means there's a fuel leak. So fuel leak combined with loss of power, if that gets on the wrong thing, if that gets on the exhaust or something, we can have a fire or an explosion or something. It could be really bad.
Yeah.
Luckily, it's not what happened. I shut down the engine as soon as I saw that. Control, power, drag, identify, verify, fix, and feather. I did all those things, and coincidentally, it happened pretty much on the climb out. So I was able to just go land single engine. I declared an emergency at Chino Airport. They let me land single engine. And I've never had a taxi on a single engine before, which was incredibly difficult, to be honest, because it's just pulling you in one direction. So luckily, I was able to use my brakes and just enough thrust to pull off the runway, and then we got out of the airplane and pulled it. And luckily, Richard was with me, and he had his bag of tools. He opened up the cowling, and like 10 minutes later, he's like, "Oh, I found out what the problem was. It was just a loose fuel line fitting." So he literally tightened that up. We cleaned up all the fuel, make sure everything was all safe, and we took back off on the airplane and head towards Camarillo. And he looked at me like I'm crazy, like I'm willing to get back in the airplane like right away. Just had like a problem with an airplane. I said, and this is how much I trust Rich. I still trust him today. And he fixed it, and I was like, "I trust you. If you said it's good enough for me, it's good enough for me." I said, "Are you going to get in the airplane with me?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Well, if you're willing to get in the airplane, I know you've got a couple kids and family at home. If you're willing to get in the airplane, then I'm willing to too." So we got in the airplane, and it was uneventful after that. But that was probably the most real emergency that I personally had. I've had loss of power instances, and also where I like squawk 7600 for something I did very dumb while flying with my young son at the time. So there's lots of little things that happen.
Yeah. We get into flying for lots of different reasons. Some people, it's something they've always wanted to do since they were a kid. What was the reason that got you into flying?
Yeah, I wish I was like the guy who said, "Oh, when I was like 5 years old, I used to stare up in the air," but that wasn't me actually. I started thinking about learning to fly when I was in high school. I remember my grandfather, when he was around, he used to tell me how he was doing flight training in the 80s and 90s, and how he never finished, and he blamed it on that I was born, and my grandmother said, "Oh, you can't go do it anymore," right? So, which You know what? It might be true. But after he passed away, I actually found his logbook, and it perked my ears up on flying. And when I was in high school, I thought about learning to fly and joining the military. I wanted to go fly like F-16s or F-14s or whatever they were flying back then. And but this was right after 9/11, so I decided that they weren't going to give me a slot for flying. They wanted me to be on the ground, and that's not really what I was looking to do. So I ended up not joining the military. Put that on pause. I eventually found that logbook, like I said, after he passed away, and it brought back all these emotions about stories and things on flight. And I immediately told all of my family, "Hey, all I want for Christmas this year was flight lessons," and everyone thought I was absolutely crazy at this time. So for some reason, people got me flying lessons for Christmas, and I started off my flying journey. And that was Christmas of 2013. I got my flight lessons for Christmas, and I had my first flight, I think, on January 2nd of 2024. And 6 months later, I had my pilot certificate. So that's kind of how I got started. Long story long.
Have you ever regretted it?
Never, not once, ever. I thought if I was going to be regretting it was when I went into debt to get my initial private pilot certificate, because back then, 10 years ago, it was a little bit different for me financially. So I thought it was going to be maybe I was regretting it when I had the credit card bill. But since then, after that was solved, I have not regretted one thing since.
I think it's funny that you said that the only thing that you might have regretted has been maybe the debt that you got into to learn how to fly.
Yep.
And now that's what you do for a living. So
And now,
tell me, connect those dots for me, how that came, because certainly the service that you're offering is way better than putting flight training on a credit card. Tell me about Stratus Financial, how that happened, what the vision is, and what kind of an impact are you making?
Yeah, absolutely. When I say that might have been my regret, it's only because I didn't realize what it was going to bring to my life and my future. And I realized by taking on that debt and then eventually paying it off, obviously, it changed the trajectory of my life. I mean, I used to work 68 hours a week, and I worked for someone else. That didn't quite jive with me, working that much. I wanted to enjoy life, and I wanted to go fly more. And if I went and worked these 68 hours a week, I wasn't going to be able to fly very much working that job. I used to be an insurance auto appraiser, and I loved what I did. It was enjoyable, but it wasn't flight. It wasn't something that we so much enjoy now. So I ended up leaving there. I stopped doing that because I started my own flight school in 2016. Built that up from one airplane, and literally I rented a closet at Riverside Airport. They took down the clothes from like from the guys who work maintenance, and I rented this little closet, made it like a full service like flying facility for me. And with one airplane that I like borrowed money from 3 different people, all saying I already had all the 2/3. It was crazy. So started the flight school up, and built that up to 14 aircraft, 2 locations, full service maintenance. And we needed financing for my students, because I realized the biggest hurdle for everybody is in learning to fly is the money. It's not cheap. Nationally, for you to go from 0 to hero or 0 hours to CFI, IMEI, whatever you want to do, it costs roughly $85,000. Now, some parts of the country are cheaper, some it's more expensive, housing, blah, blah, blah. But on average, it's $85,000. So there's no way to do that even on a credit card. People don't have $85,000 on a credit card unless you're well off and you're able to pay for it out of pocket anyways. So I was looking for in-house solutions to be able to finance my students. And so I reached out to my friend Anthony Gerasi. He owns a private lending law firm who specializes in those types of documents. And I said, "Hey, Anthony," we met in an entrepreneurs organization. And I said, "Hey, Anthony, can you help me with these documents?" I said, I don't really want to hire your law firm. I'd rather just you help me since we're friends. And that was me being cheap, and nothing's really changed. And now he's like, "I'm no longer an attorney. Don't use me as one ever." And he gets on me. So it's always fun. But I asked him to do that, and he said he'd help me out. And he looked at the business model and what the need was and how underserved it was. And he was like, "Hey, why don't we turn this into a company?" And I said, "Let's do it. Let's go help more pilots. I mean, it'll change people's lives, and it'll also be be a fun adventure to do something together, and might even make some money in the long run with it. So far, so great, at least so far.
How long ago was that, Brendan?
That was just a little over 3 years ago, maybe a little less than 3.5. We kind of started this in the midst of 2020, kind of into the year 2020. I want to say it was maybe October 2020 is when we had our first employee.
Great timing, Brendan.
I know, exactly. So, and honestly, we've done it with almost full remote workers. We have 92 employees now. From 1 to 92 in 3 years is pretty incredible, I think.
Wow. So I have a lot of questions to ask about that. So I said the timing. There was a lot going on at the end of 2020 where people were afraid. I started my car dealership back when I was in the car business in May of 2007, just right before the financial markets and real estate crashed. And it was probably within a year of starting the business that I was afraid that my family was going to be living under a bridge because nobody would finance a car loan. It was almost impossible to get a credit union or a bank to buy a loan. How have the economic conditions, interest rates impacted your business over the last 3 or 4 years? Because there's been a lot of volatility in lending. And I imagine, I don't know how lenders view your loan. I've got to imagine it's a personal loan. It's viewed as higher risk. So how do you navigate some of those things?
Well, if you notice the kind of the hot topic in the credit industry is private credit. It used to be VC money, things like that, but now the hot topic word is private credit. So we positioned ourselves as private credit. Plus, we're considered a student loan. So as you probably know, student loans are afforded different protections in bankruptcy court. So it's a little less risky. On top of that, Anthony, luckily, I wish I could take credit for this, but this was Anthony's idea. He was like, we need to go to, instead of fixed rate loans, we need variable rate loans. And we did that pretty early on, before kind of any of the other lenders were doing that. So we went to the variable rate loans, and that ended up making it so we can kind of stay afloat. So when the rates went up, payments went up. And luckily, we underwrite a little bit differently at Stratus. So we're not underwriting for future income like most student loans. We're underwriting for current income rather than what we're hoping somebody's going to make. So we either want somebody to be making money now, or we want their co-borrower to be making something now. And naturally, most of the people learning to fly are younger. Most of our borrowers have co-borrowers, so that really de-risk it quite a bit. Now, granted, capital is expensive, as you know, and it's not getting any cheaper right now. I mean, the markets are pricing in at least one rate drop before the end of the year, but I've been hearing that for like 7 or 8 months now. So who knows if that's going to happen? And honestly, this is an election year. Anything could happen.
Anything can happen, and probably will.
Probably will. I mean, just a few days ago, something crazy happened. So there could be another October surprise, and it could be on interest rates, and who knows. But luckily, we've priced in the price differences here, and like I said, we underwrite for future or for current repayment rather than future. So it really hasn't affected us that much.
What's the future of Stratus over the next 5 or 10 years? I imagine that there's so much demand. I mean, I had a conversation with you several months ago, maybe a year ago now, talking about my son going through flight school and financing it. I didn't know that was an option when I went through flight school, and thankfully was in a position that I could pay for my training. But there's got to be a pretty high percentage of student pilots who need some sort of financial assistance in order to make it through the 3 to 4 years of training that they're going to need to be able to get a high-paying job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are currently in over 260 flight schools across the U.S. We get over 2,000 loan applications every month, and there's only a fraction of those that are actually qualified, unfortunately. I wish there was more. So the demand is there. We are in a $2 billion total addressable market just in the U.S. for flight training alone. In the world, it's a $5 billion TAM. So there's a ton of market share that's available out there. And even if we had to be extremely selective on who we lend to, I expect for us to, the top of the market share that we could possibly obtain is like 600 million a year in flight training lending. I think that's obtainable in the next 5 to 10 years. Our goal for this year is to do 100 million in lending. We're not quite on track for that. We're probably on track for around 60 million this year. But next year, I anticipate us to at least hit 120 million in new pilot financing, and we're talking about 5% of the TAM. I
Wow.
hate to even use those numbers because they always sound so gimmicky, right? Oh, if I can just get a little piece of the pie, then I can take over the market, etc. But in reality, when you break down the numbers, we haven't done that much for the market, and this is every single year you need to do $2 billion in pilot loans, right? Or pilot financing of some sort. Somebody needs to pay for it, whether it's on a credit card, whether it's through us, whether it's through our competitors, or just paying cash. Those are happening. So the demand isn't going away. Air travel demand is skyrocketing up. All the pilot unions are telling us right now, oh, the pilot shortage is artificial, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not artificial. They're still canceling flights. Now we have a captain shortage at the moment, which will get solved eventually. But we do have a shortage of pilots. There's more demand than ever. It used to be the days right before Christmas or Thanksgiving. Those are the days that flight and travel were really kind of, we would have the most TSA exposures, right? Now, I think on 4th of July this year or something right around there was the record since prior to COVID. We set a new record.
Wow.
So the amount of people going through TSA is skyrocketing. That means the amount of people traveling is just going higher and higher and higher. If more and more people are traveling, we're going to need more airplanes. We're going to need more pilots, and this shortage isn't going away anytime soon. And couple that with the forced retirements during COVID, and also couple that with the retirement age not going up. I know that Senator Graham tried to raise that to 67. He was the big proponent of it. That got shut down with the FAA Reauthorization Act that just passed a few months ago. So now it's still at 65, and it's going to be like that for a very long time. So I don't see us solving this problem besides creating more pilots. And that's why you're seeing flight schools increasing in volume. You're seeing Piper come out with more and more airplanes. You're seeing Technem come out with airplanes, on the fly pretty quickly. So you're seeing the industry change and evolve. And I think that the only thing that's going to slow us down is, one, pilot shortage, and two, large aircraft shortage. I think that that's also an issue with Boeing and Airbus having their issues with quality control.
So Brandon, I want to back off the topic of pilot financing and rewind a little bit. When I started flying, all I knew was that flying was super fun and it brought a lot of joy into my life. There have been so many surprises after that I was completely unaware of. I had no idea that charitable flying existed. I had no idea of the camaraderie that existed between pilots pretty much anywhere you go, general aviation especially. After you started flying, what were some of the surprises that you had?
Well, the moment that you just said camaraderie right now, I got like goosebumps thinking about like the coolest parts about just post getting my pilot certificate, meeting all of the other, your friends who are either similar to your age or similar to your background, and learning to fly together, and then having barbecues together. I remember one of my buddies had barbecues like 2 to 3 times a week, and everyone bring over carne asada. I grew up in Southern California, so that's like the normal thing. You go bring a barbecue, not hot dogs and stuff. It's carne asada and tacos, and there was this one guy. He was from Iran, and he like made his own marinade, like an Iranian marinade on beef that was like phenomenal. His name is Saeed. So I hope I see him. I haven't seen him for a few years now because during COVID, everyone kind of that camaraderie went away. But prior to that, we used to go almost every weekend to do these barbecues and then go flying before or flying after, kind of dependent on what we're all doing. And people would be working on airplanes in their hangars, and you get to see people building airplanes and just walking around the airport and seeing the airport dogs run around and going to all the new FBOs and making friends at all the FBOs. And honestly, going to FBOs in the middle of nowhere and you knowing the CTAF frequency, because you can look it up on ForeFlight or on your map, being able to type in a code, go into there, and they've got either free snacks, or my favorite one was a Pontiac Aztec that was free to use, and it said, take the keys. And this was the most rickety, junk, ugly car I've ever driven in my life, but it was free. And I got to take it to downtown. I got food in the middle of Kansas and drove back. So those little things like that were really a big surprise to me, and the things that make general aviation really special, I think.
I agree with you. I had no idea that the FBO thing existed. I had no idea whatsoever. What? I can fly just about anywhere in the country, and I can get a car for free and take it for a couple hours to go get lunch or whatever I need to do. And even just like what you mentioned, for me, every time I swipe the gate card at the airport, and just the fact that I get to drive around inside the airport, I'll just go park at the end of the runway and sit there. That's my wife and I's favorite date place, is take some lawn chairs, put them in the back of the truck. We sit at the end of the approach end and watch the airplanes land and take off, because we can do that. We have access. That was one of the big surprises.
It was. And you know what else was a big one? They still call it the $100 hamburger. But it's going to all the airport restaurants. I mean, that's still a fun thing for me. I mean, like I said, I was going to Camaraderie that day to go look at that airplane that I wanted to buy.
One of the best airport restaurants ever.
It is one of the best. And they have this Santa Maria tri-tip sandwich, and you must go there. And they only serve it on Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And on Thursday, if they have leftovers from Wednesday, they make a spicy version of it, and which is really good too. So
you've been there a few times, Brandon. I can tell.
Maybe a couple. And then even going to, I'm talking Southern California. So if you go over to Casa Manchado at I think it's MYF, it's Montgomery Airport. They've got some of the best Mexican food just north of the border, right there. So just going to all those little airports and trying the different food. And you can even get lomo saltado at Corona Airport, which is phenomenal. They've got all the normal breakfast stuff too, but you can go to airports and go try food, and instead of just going to breakfast for the day, it's actually an adventure, and it's really enjoyable. It's something you can do with your friends and of course your family.
I love that you brought that up. I had to fly my daughter to Flagstaff this week. She's doing a summer camp, and of course it's a 3-hour drive, so why would you drive? I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Am I back? Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
I can hear you.
Did we freeze for a bit?
Check.
I can hear you. Are you back? Got me?
Check.
I can hear you. Can you hear me, or am I gone?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Check.
Podcast, mayday.
Of course. I don't know what's going on.
Oh, no.
Mayday. I hear you. Oh.
Is this where we squawk 7600?
Do you want to try to leave and come back in? I don't think it'll mess it up. It should save it, as long as you don't leave the browser.
Let's
for sure it'll save. It says it's 99% recorded, and I know if you stay in the browser, don't close the whole thing, you just click leave, it'll save it, and then you can come back in, and then you might have to restart record, but then you can stitch them together. Oh, there you are.
Am I back?
You're back.
I don't remember what we were talking about. FBO restaurant.
Airport cafes, yeah. And I was saying, I get lomo saltado at Corona, and just great little places to go.
Yeah. Well, what I was saying is my daughter had a summer camp this week, and so I needed a flyer from Phoenix to Flagstaff. And the first question that she asked was, "Is there a restaurant at that airport?" She's like, "I love going to the airport restaurants." Um, and I think that's been one of the fun things that I didn't anticipate, has been the relationships, not just with other pilots, but flying has brought business relationships to me. It's improved relationships with friends and family. I think part of that is you get to give someone an experience that maybe they thought they never might get to have in any other way. It makes me wonder, do you know if your grandpa regretted not being able to finish his training? Were you ever able to fly with him after you were able to fly?
Unfortunately, no. Never was able to fly with him, and I'm sure he regretted it, because he still kept talking about it as he got older. So I'm sure that he did, but he didn't talk too much about it all the time. I just remembered hearing the stories, and when he was learning to fly, he was doing like missionary work and stuff. So I don't think he was taking it really serious on like learning to fly, but I think he enjoyed the aspect of like helping people, and he helped a lot of people south of the border with medical supplies and stuff like that. This probably tells you how serious he was about actually learning. He was doing everything in a Cherokee 6. So it's not really a learning starter airplane. That's like 260 or 300 plus horsepower. So you never know.
Brandon, do you do any charitable flying?
I do a little bit of like Young Eagles stuff, but as of the past 2 years, I haven't really had time to do much charitable flying. I know a bunch of my friends do like Pilots and Paws, and I would love to do more charitable flying. I would love to do kind of some of the transport where they transport hearts and people who are sick. And I've helped with a few things like that, but it's been a little while for me. I wish I could say that I've done more of it recently, but I do enjoy it, and there are things to do. You can transport like live hearts. You can transport dogs. You can transport people. There's a lot of really cool things you can do. So, how about you?
Well, I do a lot of charitable flying. So I'm sure you're familiar with Angel Flight West.
Yep.
And I lead the Arizona wing of Angel Flight West. So we do free flights for people in need of medical care far from home. I think annually we do 4,000 to 5,000 flights for people, and that's all pilot donations. Pilots donate their time and their aircraft to make that happen. And that's been a fantastic experience. Most of the time I think the pilots wonder who's really being served, if it's them or if it's the people that they're flying, because it gives you such a great perspective when you get somebody in the plane that's battling cancer. Well, it's difficult to feel like you're having a bad day ever after that experience, because you get to fly an airplane, you get to be the one providing the help, but you're not having that personal battle. So charitable flying is a big part of the flying that I do. Probably very close to, I probably split about equally the amount of flying I do for business or for pleasure with charitable flying. What I haven't done is, we're recording now in the middle of August, and you're going to be traveling to the Mecca of air shows and air experiences, making the pilgrimage to Oshkosh. I haven't done that. For anyone else who hasn't done it, I would love for you to describe flying there for the first time and what the experience of being at Oshkosh is like.
Yeah, so I've been going there since 2014 or 15. I think in 2014 I went right after I got my pilot certificate, but I went there just via airline. In 2015, I flew myself, actually. And for those of you who don't know what Oshkosh is a city in Wisconsin. You can look it up on a map. It's not actually called Oshkosh, although all the pilots call it. It's actually called EAA Air Venture. So when you go out there, all the people of the city of Oshkosh, they don't call it Oshkosh. They're like, why are you calling it Oshkosh? That's weird. They call it EAA. And all of the pilots look at them like, what are you talking about? It's not EAA, it's Oshkosh. It is kind of a funny, like, perspective difference whenever you go out there. But the first time I flew out there, I actually was trying to get my instrument rating right before I left in 2015. I could not finish it. I ended up having my check ride and it got discontinued for like aircraft maintenance issue or something. So I didn't actually finish my check ride. And I'm talking to all my friends, like, should I cancel my trip, etc. I was taking my son and his mom at the time, and we were going to fly out there in my Cessna 172. I was going to fly from California to Wisconsin. And this was literally a cross-country flight. Normally cross-country is over 50 nautical miles, but this was literally across half the country or more. So I decided we're still going to do it. And everyone told me, yeah, most people fly VFR there anyways. They said, just divert and don't expect anything different. So I had 10 days off of work. I said, let's do it. And we'll look for weather openings. And I ended up flying myself there. And that's what I said. I met so many cool people at little airports. I was looking for great like fuel stops that I can get cheaper gas and stuff at the time. And we ended up making Oshkosh. In the first year I slept under the wing. And I actually had friends of mine who I met who do other podcasts. One of them is called the Why We Fly podcast, and his name's Mike Harris. He's been a great friend of mine for years and years and years. And I just asked him, hey, do you need anybody to report while you're there because you're not going to Oshkosh that year? And he let me record it. And back then I was recording like on a telephone, like on my iPhone, and I like recording to him. So but once I got there landing, they have you kind of enter this pattern of like 1,000 airplanes coming all around you, and it looks like you're in like a World War II like movie of all these airplanes like getting next to you. So you're feeling every bump from all the wake turbulence of like thousands of airplanes around you. And then eventually you get into a single file line and you're not allowed to talk to the controllers. It's the only time that you're allowed to land in a controlled airfield without talking to anybody. They tell you to rock your wings. It is just a blast. You can look it up. Just type in rock your wings Oshkosh and you can see kind of all the stuff that happens. It's really neat. So then you go in and the controllers, they don't want you to talk still. They just want you to land on one of the dots, land on the green dot, land on the orange dot, land on whatever the dot it is. And you go and land on that dot. And then you have to get off the runway and you taxi onto the grass. And then they have you taxi to wherever you're holding a little sign. It'll say like General Aviation Camping or General Aviation Parking, GAP or GAC. And you go over there, and I camped for the first few years. So we went to General Aviation Camping, and we literally set up a tent underneath the wing of our airplane, along with thousands of other airplanes. And that's why you call it Aviation Mecca, because they literally land 3 or 4 airplanes on one runway at one time, the exact same time. And then everybody camps under the airplanes. And since then, I don't like camping in a tent anymore, really. So now I go to what's called Camp Scholler, which is actually on the EAA grounds. And it's just a big camaraderie. Everybody there is an airplane person. Either they love airplanes, they're pilots, something along those lines. And I have one amazing story that I'll tell you about when I went to Oshkosh, and this was when Bob Hoover was still around. There's a company called Jet Aviva. I think they're still around, and they do private jets. And Jet Aviva, before they got sold to somebody a few years ago, they used to do a party, and they used to have these pink flamingos kind of around their camp area. Like I've got my Stratus camp, they had the Jet Aviva camp, right? And they always had like a celebrity that came by and on 1 or 2 of the nights throughout the week. And one of the nights was Bob Hoover. And this was 6 months before he passed away. And this is one of those goosebump moments too. Me and my son got to go shake his hand and take a picture with Bob Hoover. And my son had no idea. He was like 4 or 5 at the time. Now he's 13. He probably still doesn't know. But I was just like in awe. Like I'm not celebrity starstruck ever. But this guy was like, you pour iced tea up while doing it in a roll up with like your non-dominant hand in a plane that's not supposed to roll. Everybody should go look out a twin commander pouring iced tea upside down. You should Google that. Really
I'm going to go look it up.
You should. It's the coolest thing you'll ever see in your life. And this guy would do this like on a single engine too. It was crazy. So I met Bob Hoover there, and that was like my aviation hero because he was like a pilot's pilot.
That's awesome. Brandon, I always like to end. Sometimes I begin with this question, but one of the motivations for me getting into flying was actually when I lost my dad, and I was just looking at my life, and I'd always wanted to fly, but it wasn't something that I had really just allowed myself to do. And my dad was 66 at the time. I was 43. And I thought, I don't want to get to 66 and not have done some of these things that I've wanted to do. And my dad, oh no, again. We still out?
Check, check, check.
Still out?
Check, check, check.
I can hear you just fine.
We're so close. We're almost
Right
there.
at the end. Am I back?
I think
Not yet.
like 30 seconds and hope for the best. Not yet.
Darn it.
I got you. Perfect. At
Okay,
66.
here I am. For an explanation for anyone listening, there might be some weird editing things in this podcast. Sometimes things don't go exactly right. I think, Brandon, this is the third or fourth time we tried to connect to record, and we've had the audio cut out several times. We started with the bad mic, so we're doing great. If this was flying, I think we would scrub the mission and just call it a day and go back home. What I was gonna say is my dad would taught me before he passed away, Alan, remember the little things. In flying or in life, what are some little things that you would like for your kids to remember? What are the most important things that are the little things for you?
Yeah, so I'll start off with kind of something that's actually big. I have a motto, and I say yes to everything. I don't know, maybe I've got FOMO of everything, but I always want to say yes to everything. I want to say yes to doing the crazy things. I want to say yes to going out with all my friends. I want to say yes to being there for my son. I want to say yes to being there with my family. Like tonight, I've got to drive about an hour and a half to go see my family, and one of my family members moving out of the state. And it would be real easy to say there's going to be an hour and a half or 2 hours worth of traffic. I don't want to go tonight, but I said yes because I want to go see them. So that's my big thing. I like to say yes to everything. Sometimes it gets me in trouble. I pack my calendar a little too packed, but I think it allows me to live life. And if I pass away at an age like your father did at 66, I know that I will have lived a very full life. For my son, I tell him to not be afraid. I tell him to do the things that make him uncomfortable. And it probably goes with my motto of saying yes. But if you do the things that'll make you uncomfortable, it's going to make you more comfortable in everything in life. I know I used to be really afraid of like speaking and public speaking and even talking on podcasts like this. And now it feels more natural, and I'm not nervous ever anymore. And it's fun. Do all the things that you enjoy. So those are some of the little things. And if you enjoy flying, go get that pilot certificate. Figure out how to do it. It's worth it. It's changed. It literally has changed my life.
And I would agree with that 100%. I would say it saved my life, and it continues to change it almost every time I fly. Brandon, I know you also have a YouTube channel. You have a podcast that's Aviation Mentors. What do you talk about, in case somebody wants to hear more from you? And if somebody is looking to start their pilot journey, how do they find Stratus Financial so that they can get some financial assistance with that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast is called Aviation Mentors. It's meant for new pilots that are either learning to fly or getting ready to learn to fly. We also talk about different careers and jobs. So if you're already a pilot and you're working on becoming a commercial, or maybe you just got your commercial pilot certificate, we also have some interviews in there. We talk about everything from airplane maintenance to current events to learning to fly, and even the boring regulations and stuff. So we have a little bit of everything. We've got over 130 episodes out via audio. You can find that on Spotify. You can find it on RSS, Apple podcast, you name it. We just started season 2, which includes video, where I'm at my podcast studio right now. So you could check it out on YouTube. And if you're interested in learning to fly, and either you own a flight school or you're an investor and looking for alternative investments, or if you're a student pilot wanting to learn to fly, you can reach out to us at Stratus Financial. We do student loans strictly for pilots. It's our niche, and it's been a fun one for us. So you can find us at www.stratus.finance for that, and then for Aviation Mentors, it's aviationmentors.com.
Awesome. Brandon, thanks for sharing a part of your day with me amid the ups and downs and the challenges that we had. This has been a lot of fun. I've appreciated the time that you've given me.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun, and whether or not we were typing on the chat with losing audio and whatnot, it's still been a blast. So thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Alan.
Absolutely.